Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley's death in 1977 was not caused by a single overdose, but by the cumulative collapse of his body under a medical phenomenon known as polypharmacy, the lethal interaction of multiple prescription drugs that individually may not be toxic but become deadly when combined. At the time of his death, the autopsy revealed 8 prescription drugs in his system, including Demerol, a narcotic painkiller, codeine, Valium, a tranquilizer, antihistamines, and sedative hypnotics. None of these substances appeared in fatal doses on their own. Instead, the simultaneous presence of these drugs synergistically depressed his central nervous system, leading to respiratory and cardiac failure. Presley's dependency didn't begin as recreational drug abuse. It originated from chronic health conditions, Crohn's disease, hypoglycemia, insomnia, and an enlarged heart, that made him reliant on medical intervention. His career demanded constant touring, physical endurance, and stage perfection, forcing him to depend on medications to function. Over time, this regimen spiraled beyond treatment into full dependency, reinforced by permissive medical oversight. His personal physician, Dr. George Nicopolis, supplied vast quantities of drugs under the guise of medical necessity, earning him the nickname Dr. Nick. Presley traveled with 3 suitcases, filled with pills and injections, taking them throughout the day to stay awake, sleep, or manage pain. This dependency became so normalized within his inner circle that serious withdrawal or detoxification attempts in 1973 and 1974 were abandoned under pressure to resume performing. In the final years, Presley's body mirrored the toll of this pharmacological excess. Once hailed for his charisma and vitality, he appeared swollen and lethargic, a visible product of chronic overmedication. The coroner's report confirmed no singular overdose, but death by drug interaction, a medical and ethical failure compounded by enablers who valued productivity over health. After his death, Dr. Nicopolis was tried and later had his medical license revoked for malpractice, having prescribed thousands of pills without legitimate therapeutic justification. The most haunting detail was that Presley, a man who revolutionized modern music, died as a victim of legal medicine gone unchecked. His heart stopped not from rebellion or excess, but from systemic negligence. Cory Monteith. Cory Monteith's death in 2013 revealed one of addiction's most misunderstood dangers: the physiological loss of tolerance following sobriety. After years of struggling with substance abuse, the Glee actor had reportedly achieved months of abstinence before relapsing during a trip to Vancouver. When his body no longer carried the tolerance built up during active addiction, a dose that once felt normal suddenly became lethal. The coroner's report confirmed mixed drug toxicity involving heroin and alcohol, a combination that severely depresses respiratory and cardiac functions. Monteith's case underscores a critical medical reality. When an addict stops using opioids, their body's chemical defenses rapidly reset. But the craving, the neurochemical memory of addiction, remains strong. Upon relapse, the brain pushes for the previous dose level, unaware that the body can no longer process it safely. This biological mismatch causes a sudden and often fatal overdose. The British Columbia Coroner's Service emphasized that Monteith's death was accidental, triggered not by an unusually large dose but by his body's inability to handle a previously routine amount after detox. Beyond the biology, Monteith's story also highlights systemic gaps in addiction treatment. He had attended multiple rehabilitation programs and was vocal about his struggles, aiming to inspire others through honesty. Yet his final treatment followed an abstinence-only model, a traditional recovery approach emphasizing total cessation without pharmacological maintenance. While such programs offer vital emotional and behavioral tools, they frequently fail to manage the physical vulnerability following detox. In the critical days after leaving rehab, Monteith was physiologically unprotected from relapse, a time frame known by addiction specialists as the danger window. Monteith's portrayal of Finn Hudson in Glee made him an emblem of optimism and youthful ambition, which made his sudden death all the more devastating for fans and co-stars. John Belushi. John Belushi's death in 1982 became one of the defining tragedies of Hollywood's drug epidemic, marking the lethal danger of a speedball, a mixture of cocaine and heroin. The 33-year-old comedian was found dead in his bungalow at the Chateau Marmont in Los Angeles, his system overwhelmed by the opposing forces of these 2 drugs. The mechanism of death was deceptively simple yet scientifically brutal. Cocaine kept his body overstimulated and masked the sedative effects of heroin. When the stimulant's effects wore off, the full depressive power of the opioids surged through his system, paralyzing his breathing and stopping his heart before any medical help could intervene. Belushi's substance abuse was not hidden. It was woven into the chaotic fabric of his fame. During his years on Saturday Night Live and the Blues Brothers, he was known for unmatched energy, wild, improvisational, and unpredictable. That manic brilliance was fueled by constant stimulant use, which helped him stay awake through grueling production schedules and late-night creative sessions. However, the same hyperactivity he was celebrated for began breaking down his body. Colleagues later described him as looking bloated and ghostly on set, his physical appearance eroding under the strain of chemical dependency. Friends and bandmates attempted interventions, but Belushi's charisma and fame often deflected genuine attempts to impose limits. The cultural environment surrounding him made recovery almost impossible. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, the entertainment industry treated drug use as a mark of intensity, not illness. Cocaine was normalized as a creative enhancer, while heroin became the dark counterbalance, a way to come down, to rest after nights of excess. This dual pattern created a perfect storm for dependency and misjudgment. In Belushi's final months, his hotel room became a revolving door for enablers and dealers, including acquaintances who supplied him drugs under the illusion of control and moderation. Ironically, Belushi's death did briefly shift Hollywood's attitude towards substance abuse, sparking public outrage and tabloid fascination. Yet the medical lesson was overshadowed by scandal. The tragedy revealed that speedballing doesn't double the high, it doubles the risk of death. His death certificate listed acute cocaine and heroin intoxication, but the true cause was deeper: a lethal mix of cultural permissiveness, physical exhaustion, and biochemical deception that ended the life of one of comedy's most electrifying forces at the peak of his fame. Chris Farley. Chris Farley's death in 1997 mirrored John Belushi's so closely that it seemed almost scripted by fate. Like Belushi, Farley died at age 33 from a speedball, a mixture of cocaine and heroin that creates an artificial balance between euphoria and sedation before collapsing into respiratory failure. He was found in his Chicago apartment after a night of heavy partying, his heart unable to withstand the strain. The autopsy confirmed the same lethal combination that killed his idol 15 years earlier. Farley's addiction was both physical and psychological. From his early days on Saturday Night Live, his comedy relied on explosive physicality, falling through tables, shouting at full volume, and throwing himself into sketches with complete abandon. That energy made him a fan favorite, but it also demanded recovery through substances that could counteract the exhaustion. Cocaine kept him performing. Alcohol and opiates brought him down afterward. Behind the scenes, his weight, insecurities, and deep-rooted anxiety created a cycle of self-punishment. His friends often described him as desperate to please and terrified of letting people down, a dynamic that made him vulnerable to enablers who saw his excess as part of the act, rather than a cry for help. The eerie parallel to Belushi went beyond circumstance. Farley openly idolized him, reportedly watching old clips obsessively and even visiting Belushi's grave for inspiration. According to fellow SNL castmates, Farley would sometimes wear Belushi's wardrobe pieces kept in storage and joked that he would die the same way. Those jokes became prophecy. Adam Sandler and David Spade, among others, tried to intervene multiple times. But Farley's fame and charm often overpowered concern. His handlers and acquaintances tolerated his drug use to keep him functional on set, echoing the same pattern of permissiveness that once surrounded Belushi. One of Farley's final appearances, hosting Saturday Night Live in 1997, showed visible signs of deterioration, slurred speech, sweat, and erratic energy. His comedic timing was still sharp, but his body was clearly faltering. Within months, he was gone. His story closed a tragic loop in Hollywood comedy. Two brilliant performers, generations apart, undone by the same chemical combination and the same industry culture that mistook self-destruction for commitment to the craft. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's descent into addiction began not from personal indulgence, but from institutional coercion. At just 16, while filming at MGM, she was placed on a controlled regimen of stimulants and sedatives, pills to wake her up, pills to make her sleep. Studio executives believed this was necessary to keep her slim, energetic, and compliant during the relentless filming schedule that produced hits like The Wizard of Oz. Her dependency was not a secret, it was a professional mandate. The studio's in-house doctors routinely prescribed amphetamines to suppress appetite and barbiturates to force rest, trapping Garland in a chemically managed existence before she was even an adult. This pattern created one of the earliest cases of system-induced addiction in Hollywood history. The pills allowed her to perform through exhaustion, but quickly warped her physical and mental health. Garland suffered nervous breakdowns, hallucinations, and violent mood swings. She often described feeling like a puppet on strings, performing under the control of substances she neither wanted nor understood. As she aged, the consequences of this forced dependency deepened. By the time she tried to take control of her life and career, her body and brain were already conditioned for constant pharmacological input. Despite the torment, Garland's performances remained luminous. Her rendition of Over the Rainbow became an anthem of longing and hope, made even more tragic by what it cost her to deliver it. Offstage, she battled crippling anxiety and severe insomnia, conditions worsened by the very medications prescribed to treat them. When she was eventually fired by MGM for being unreliable, her dependency only intensified. She sought help from private doctors, but most perpetuated the cycle, refilling prescriptions to keep her working rather than addressing the underlying illness. In 1969, Garland was found dead in her London home at the age of 47 from an accidental overdose of barbiturates. Toxicology reports showed no sign of suicide, only exhaustion from decades of chemical management. The press labeled her a tragic figure, but the truth was more disturbing. She had been chemically engineered for performance. Her death was less a personal failure than a system malfunction, proof that the golden age of Hollywood often gilded its stars with poison. Even her daughter, Liza Minnelli, would later remark that her mother's fatal habit was introduced by studio doctors pretending to care. Garland's brilliance had been real, but so was the cost of the machinery that made her shine. River Phoenix. River Phoenix's death outside the Viper Room in 1993 marked the end of Hollywood's illusion that youthful innocence could survive its nightlife. At just 23, Phoenix collapsed on the sidewalk of the Sunset Strip nightclub co-owned by Johnny Depp, moments after ingesting a combination of cocaine and heroin, another variation of the lethal speedball. Toxicology reports later confirmed the presence of morphine, cocaine, Valium, and ephedrine in his system, a mixture that caused cardiac arrest and respiratory failure almost instantly. The drugs were snorted, not injected, signaling a new era in substance use among young stars, one less associated with traditional heroin addicts and more with the experimental culture of the 1990s. Phoenix's death stunned both the public and the industry because it seemed so inconsistent with his public image. He was known for his environmental activism, vegan lifestyle, and reputation as a thoughtful, introspective actor who avoided the excesses of fame. His performances in Stand By Me and My Own Private Idaho had already established him as one of the most gifted actors of his generation. Often described as the new James Dean, but behind the idealism was a growing conflict between the purity he projected and the pressures of adult stardom. The darker circles of Los Angeles nightlife, combined with a culture of experimentation and performance anxiety, drew him towards substances that promised relief and belonging. The night he died, Phoenix had been performing with Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers and spending time with friends, including his brother Joaquin and sister Rain. Witnesses described the chaos as Phoenix collapsed outside the club, gasping for air before falling unconscious. Paramedics arrived within minutes, but the combination of stimulants and depressants had already shut down his respiratory system. The coroner ruled the cause as acute multiple drug intoxication. Phoenix's case exposed how the cultural landscape of the early 1990s blurred the lines between art, rebellion, and addiction. The countercultural idealism of his youth, rejecting mainstream Hollywood values while still working within its structure, created a tension that mirrored his internal struggle. In the aftermath, legal authorities investigated potential charges against those who supplied him the drugs, treating the incident not just as a personal tragedy but as a criminal act reflecting the widening reach of the drug epidemic. For Hollywood, Phoenix's death served as a generational warning. Addiction was no longer confined to fading stars or burnout veterans. It had become embedded in the very idea of what it meant to be young, creative, and consumed by fame. Heath Ledger. Heath Ledger's death in 2008 revealed how modern addiction had evolved from illicit drug use to the deadly complexity of prescription medication. Found lifeless in his New York apartment at age 28, Ledger's toxicology report listed 6 different prescription drugs: oxycodone and hydrocodone, opioid painkillers, diazepam and alprazolam, anti-anxiety benzodiazepines, and temazepam and doxylamine, sedative hypnotics for sleep. None of these medications, on their own, appeared in toxic levels. Together, however, they formed a deadly pharmacological cocktail that slowed his breathing to a stop. His death was ruled an accidental overdose caused by combined drug toxicity. Ledger's dependency emerged gradually through the physical and emotional demands of acting. His commitment to deeply psychological roles, particularly the Joker in The Dark Knight, left him exhausted and unable to sleep. In interviews, he mentioned averaging just 2 hours of rest a night. Seeking relief, he began cycling through prescription drugs, first for pain, then for anxiety, then for insomnia. Each new medication was prescribed by different doctors for separate complaints, but their interactions created a compounding effect. This condition, known as polypharmacy, occurs when multiple central nervous system depressants overlap, amplifying their sedative impact until vital body functions shut down. Ledger's insomnia was not unique among actors, but his approach to self-management reflected a modern pattern, treating chronic exhaustion with pharmacology rather than rest or therapy. Colleagues recalled that during the filming of The Dark Knight, he often self-isolated and spoke about his inability to turn off his brain. His insomnia became both a symptom and a cause of deeper instability. Even after production ended, he reportedly continued taking medications to force sleep, unaware that his nightly combinations, painkillers, tranquilizers, and sleeping pills, could interact lethally. In the aftermath, the media focused on his method acting, implying his commitment to dark roles had driven him over the edge. Yet medical evidence pointed to a more precise cause: systemic prescription overlap and inadequate oversight. Ledger's case was a modern parallel to Elvis Presley's, both victims of legally sanctioned medication misuse that blurred the line between treatment and addiction. The tragedy underscored how easy it is for dependency to emerge not from escapism, but from exhaustion. Ledger's portrayal of the Joker remains one of cinema's most haunting performances, but behind it was a man fighting a quieter battle against the very substances meant to help him rest. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe's death in 1962 exposed the dark underside of Hollywood's therapeutic culture, a system that treated psychological pain with barbiturates and sedation instead of actual mental health care. Found dead in her Brentwood home at 36, Monroe's toxicology report revealed extremely high levels of barbiturates, a class of central nervous system depressants widely prescribed in mid-20th century America for anxiety and insomnia. Empty bottles of Nembutal and chloral hydrate were discovered near her bedside. The coroner ruled her death a probable suicide, but the medical details painted a broader picture of dependency fueled by overprescription and professional neglect. Monroe's addiction had deep psychological roots. Her childhood was marked by instability, institutionalization, and abuse, conditions that left her with lifelong anxiety and depression. When fame arrived, it amplified those vulnerabilities. The pressure to maintain her image, memorize lines, and endure constant scrutiny led her to rely on alcohol and sedatives to function. Her personal physician, Dr. Ralph Greenson, and a network of other doctors regularly prescribed her powerful sleeping aids and tranquilizers, often without coordination. In practice, she could access overlapping prescriptions for different brands of the same class of drugs, multiplying the danger of accidental overdose. By the early 1960s, Monroe was living on a rotating regimen of pills. Friends and assistants noted that she took stimulants to wake up, tranquilizers to steady herself during the day, and barbiturates to sleep. This constant chemical balancing act blurred the line between self-medication and dependence. On film sets, her exhaustion was visible, frequent absences, slurred lines, and sudden emotional collapses, yet studios tolerated it as long as her star power remained profitable. When she was fired from Something's Got to Give, her already fragile mental state worsened, and her medication intake increased in both frequency and dosage. What made Monroe's death especially tragic was that it reflected a systemic failure rather than personal recklessness. Her doctors were not street dealers but respected professionals who supplied her every need under the banner of care. The prevailing belief in Hollywood at the time was that performance could be chemically sustained, that a few pills could erase anxiety and restore beauty. In Monroe's case, that belief became fatal. Philip Seymour Hoffman. Philip Seymour Hoffman's death in 2014 was a clinical demonstration of how relapse, after long-term sobriety, can be the most dangerous phase of addiction. Found dead in his Manhattan apartment at 46, Hoffman had a syringe still in his arm and dozens of bags of heroin nearby. Toxicology tests revealed heroin combined with other substances, confirming acute drug intoxication. What made his case so striking wasn't the drugs themselves, but the biological conditions under which he took them. Hoffman had maintained 23 years of sobriety before relapsing, first on prescription painkillers, then on heroin. During those years of abstinence, his body's tolerance for opioids had completely reset. When he resumed use, even a dose he might have once tolerated became instantly lethal. This phenomenon, known as tolerance loss, is one of the most misunderstood and deadly aspects of opioid addiction. After detox, the body's neurochemical system no longer adjusts to the presence of the drug. Yet the brain's craving mechanisms, driven by memory and habit, remain active. When a recovered user relapses, they often return to their old dosage pattern, unaware that their body can no longer process it. The result is immediate respiratory depression, cardiac failure, and death, precisely what killed Hoffman. Hoffman's relapse followed a familiar psychological trajectory. Years of professional intensity, emotional exhaustion, and chronic pain from his demanding film schedule eroded his defenses. He had entered treatment less than a year before his death and was reportedly sober again just weeks prior, meaning his tolerance was at its lowest point when he relapsed. His death, therefore, wasn't a matter of excessive indulgence but of biology and timing, proof that abstinence alone does not equal safety. Behind the clinical data was one of the most respected actors of his generation. Hoffman's performances in Capote, The Master, and Doubt were studies in human vulnerability and control, the same duality that defined his personal struggle. Friends described him as disciplined and generous, a mentor to younger artists, yet haunted by the constant effort to stay balanced. His relapse shattered the misconception that longevity in recovery guarantees protection. Anna Nicole Smith. Anna Nicole Smith's death in 2007 represented a different kind of Hollywood overdose, not a reckless binge, but a gradual collapse under the weight of legal drugs prescribed in excessive combination. Found unresponsive in her Florida hotel room at age 39, Smith's autopsy revealed 9 prescription medications in her system, the most dangerous being chloral hydrate, a powerful sedative, and lorazepam, a benzodiazepine commonly used for anxiety. The coroner ruled her death accidental, caused by combined drug intoxication. What made the case particularly alarming was that every drug she took was prescribed by licensed physicians, yet no one coordinated her treatment or monitored the cumulative effects. Smith's dependency developed over years of physical pain, emotional distress, and public scrutiny. Her career, built on beauty and spectacle, demanded constant control over her appearance and image. After giving birth to her daughter, she suffered from abscesses and chronic infections, conditions that were treated with painkillers and sleep aids rather than medical rehabilitation. Doctors provided overlapping prescriptions for anxiety, pain, and insomnia, each one interacting with the others to slow her breathing and heart rate. Chloral hydrate, in particular, was an outdated sedative, rarely prescribed in modern medicine because of its extreme potency and high risk of fatal overdose when mixed with other depressants. Her final months were marked by erratic behavior and visible disorientation. Yet her entourage, lawyers, doctors, and assistants, continued to indulge her drug use rather than intervene. Investigations later revealed that one of her prescribing physicians had written scripts using false names to avoid pharmacy alerts, a practice that blurred the line between medical care and supply. The environment around Smith resembled a controlled bubble where emotional pain was managed entirely through pharmacology. Smith's public image made her story even more tragic. Known for her flamboyant personality, reality television fame, and resemblance to Marilyn Monroe, she became both a spectacle and a commodity. Like Monroe, she sought peace in the same class of depressants that ultimately destroyed her. The combination of chloral hydrate and benzodiazepines acts synergistically, depressing the central nervous system far beyond what either drug can do alone. Within hours, breathing slows, the heart weakens, and consciousness fades, often before the user realizes they're in danger. Renfro. Brad Renfro's death in 2008 revealed the long-term consequences of introducing a child to adult fame without protection or guidance. Found dead in his Los Angeles apartment at age 25, Renfro's toxicology report confirmed acute heroin and morphine intoxication. He had injected the drug shortly before his death. Friends reported that he had recently completed a rehab program and seemed optimistic, making his sudden passing a grim example of how quickly relapse can reverse progress. Renfro's exposure to drugs began alarmingly early. Cast at age 12 in The Client, his natural intensity and unfiltered performances made him an instant sensation. But behind the acclaim, there was no structured support system for a boy suddenly earning millions. He was introduced to marijuana and alcohol during his teenage years and later to heroin, which he reportedly first used before turning 15. The transition from early fame to adult life became impossible. While his peers were finishing high school, Renfro was navigating addiction, legal trouble, and the constant instability of Hollywood. By his 20s, he had been arrested multiple times for drug possession, driving under the influence, and violating probation. Despite multiple rehab attempts, he often relapsed soon after release. Addiction specialists note that early-onset substance abuse, especially during adolescence, alters the brain's reward circuitry, creating lifelong difficulty in achieving sobriety. Renfro's case illustrated this perfectly. Even after periods of apparent stability, his neural chemistry remained primed for dependency. In his final years, Renfro was attempting to rebuild his career, taking small roles and reconnecting with family. Those close to him said he was hopeful but still physically fragile from years of use. When he relapsed, the dose that once provided euphoria became deadly. Like many long-term opioid users, his tolerance had dropped during sobriety, turning his comeback attempt into a fatal miscalculation. Renfro's death went largely unnoticed in the media compared to other celebrity overdoses, overshadowed by the simultaneous death of Heath Ledger just days later. Yet his story exposes one of Hollywood's harshest truths. The system that rewards precocious talent often abandons it when fame fades. Simpson. Don Simpson's death in 1996 showed how Hollywood excess could evolve into a self-contained system of addiction, insulated by money, power, and denial. At 52, the blockbuster producer behind Top Gun and Beverly Hills Cop was found dead in his Bel Air mansion from heart failure caused by a mix of cocaine and prescription drugs, including morphine and Valium. The autopsy revealed long-term damage consistent with chronic stimulant and sedative abuse. In his home, investigators discovered over 2,000 prescription pills, most obtained under legitimate medical supervision. For years, Simpson's wealth had allowed him to live within a private ecosystem of enablers, doctors, assistants, and security staff who facilitated rather than stopped his drug use. Unlike many Hollywood addicts, Simpson's dependency wasn't hidden. It was part of his persona. Known for his high-octane lifestyle, he surrounded himself with fast cars, lavish parties, and constant stimulation. Cocaine was his preferred drug, taken both for pleasure and productivity. He claimed it helped him generate ideas, maintain focus, and keep up with the punishing pace of the entertainment business. But when the stimulant highs became unsustainable, he turned to prescription sedatives to rest. This alternating pattern of artificial energy and sedation mirrored the same dangerous duality that had killed John Belushi and Chris Farley, a physiological tug-of-war that eventually broke down his heart. By the 1990s, Simpson's health was deteriorating, and his reputation in Hollywood was unraveling. Studios tolerated his instability as long as his films made money. He reportedly spent millions annually on drugs, sex, and luxury, transforming his mansion into a fortress of indulgence. When he attempted detox, he hired unconventional medical practitioners to design home-based programs, one of which was led by Dr. Stephen Ammerman, a physician who died of a drug overdose inside Simpson's home just months before Simpson's own death. This event underscored how deeply his addiction had corrupted even the supposed efforts to save him. In many ways, Simpson's death symbolized a shift in Hollywood's addiction narrative, from the struggling performer to the enabler at the top of the hierarchy. His downfall exposed how power could shield self-destruction from consequence. Michael K. Williams. Michael K. Williams's death in 2021 brought Hollywood's drug crisis into the modern era, where synthetic opioids like fentanyl had replaced heroin as the deadliest substance in circulation. Found in his Brooklyn apartment at 54, Williams died from acute drug intoxication after using a small amount of heroin unknowingly laced with fentanyl. Unlike the complex polypharmacy cases of earlier decades, this tragedy reflected a new and terrifying reality: the extreme potency and unpredictability of today's illicit drug supply. Just a few milligrams of fentanyl, an amount barely visible to the naked eye, can stop a person's breathing within minutes. Williams's struggle with addiction was neither secret nor sensationalized. He spoke openly in interviews about his lifelong battle with substance use, describing how fame never insulated him from relapse. His performance as Omar Little in The Wire, a character who navigated the same streets that once shaped Williams' own youth, became a powerful example of how art and life intertwined. But while the public admired his authenticity, Williams continued to relapse intermittently, often after periods of intense emotional strain or creative exhaustion. His death occurred after a reported stretch of sobriety, suggesting that, like Philip Seymour Hoffman and Cory Monteith, his tolerance may have been low when he used again. The conditions surrounding his overdose also reflected broader social patterns. In the 2020s, fentanyl contamination had become pervasive, infiltrating heroin, cocaine, and counterfeit pills. Users often didn't know what they were taking. This made every relapse a game of chance, even for those who used infrequently. Williams's case highlighted the shift from addiction as a personal crisis to addiction as a public health emergency. Earlier generations died from overprescription and medical negligence. Today's victims die from contamination and potency far beyond their control. If you liked this analysis, you'll love where I go next. Click the video on your screen and find out.